So welcome everyone to this first scientific lecture of the Trusted project. Today we are going to have a lecture on blockchain application landscape, verticals and themes with the sample use cases. We will have with us two colleagues. We have with us two colleagues of Wageningen Economic and Research from Wageningen University and Research. Their names are Lan Wassenaar, a strategic senior scientist working in risk and resilience, and Mireille van Hilton, a researcher working in business informatics, agri-food. So these activities are framed in the scientific lectures of Trusted that we are having today and next week. So stay tuned, or well, you already have the link for next week about the physical layer lectures with colleagues from IBM Brazil, and digital layer will be on the 2nd of June with colleagues from IBM Zurich and California. Just for those ones that haven't participated in Trusted activities before, just to say that Trusted, it's an EU project. It's a project financed by the European Commission. And partners are INL, the International Iberian Nanotechnology Laboratory in Portugal, IBM Research in Switzerland, and Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. It's a project that will last till September 2023. And yeah, the main aim is to link INL with two of the best leading institutions in blockchain technologies, as it is IBM Zurich, that is the most reputed center in Europe focusing on future chip technologies. They have developed the Hyperledger Fabric platform, providing a foundation for blockchain solutions. And Wageningen University and Research, that is the top one university in the world in the area of food, agriculture, and environment. Other objectives that we have is to improve INL innovation capacity and market orientation, and to give visibility to the research activities of INL. So this is an overview of the activities that we have in this project. So for you to know, there will be more scientific lectures like this one, more weeks like this one, then technology workshops, technical workshops, networking events, and there will be one summer school soon in the last week of August. We will inform you about this in the next week. All the activities will be framed in these three areas: the application area, like today, the physical layer, and the digital layer. And before moving to the presentations of our colleagues, just some housekeeping rules. So remember to have the microphones mute. If you have any questions, just raise your hand at any moment of the presentation. And just to inform you also that this meeting will be recorded and will be shared in our Trusted website. So this is also, I pass the floor to Lan. Thank you.
If you would allow me to share my screen.
I think that you may be able at the moment.
Yes.
Just try and let me know if not.
I think it is working. Yes?
Yeah, we can see it.
From the end. Let's start from the beginning. It's good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to give you this lecture. And it is called a scientific lecture. So I suppose it's a bit about the theory, a bit about the methods, and also a bit about finding. But the idea is not to give you a full spectrum information, a lot of facts about blockchain application, but rather to give you some thing to think about, mean to inspire you. And I'm not giving this lecture alone. It will be a duet between me and my colleague, Mireille. And so we'll give alternately a bit of we'll go through different topics. So I'm going to go through the slides. We have put a subtitle to this talk. It's about blockchain application landscape. It's very difficult to describe what a landscape is, but we will introduce first some general themes, then we'll give some...
Lan, we can hear you a little bit low. I don't know if you can maybe put your mic a little bit closer. We were trying before, but we were having issues before.
Is this better?
A bit, yes, yes, a bit.
I will try to speak louder.
Okay, thank you.
So I will I'll give this lecture together with my colleagues, and we'll do it in a duet. And we will first go through some general theories and a little bit of research methods, and then more in detail into blockchain application landscape through description of the verticals and two examples, which we'll come back to. Is it now better?
Yes, a bit.
Okay.
Joe is saying no, but compared from before, it's just a bit better. I guess that we cannot do much.
I think the sound of the or the control of the microphone may be too low, but what I'm saying is that I have to put my volume at 100% to barely hear something from you. So I don't know, it's not me for sure, because I was hearing very well Nuri before.
My apologies. I tried to put my mic closer to my mouth. I hope this helps.
Can I give a tip? Goedemiddag. If you go to preferences on Zoom, and then you'll be able to turn the volume up a little bit on your own mic.
Yeah, maybe that's the case.
Yeah, it will help you. Dankjewel.
Dankjewel. Now I'm missing my screen. A little bit introduction, but I think Nuria already gave an introduction of the two of us. So my name is Lam van Wassenaar, with a font in between, but doesn't really matter. I'm an economist, so my introduction, my talk would be mostly from the perspective of the application with some economic theory and thinking. And Mireille will introduce more on the research part and also from the perspective of software application. So today's talk will be mainly focused on the application layer, and the three layers have been introduced before, so I'm not going to repeat it. First of all, I think it's good to give you some theoretical references which we use to study a blockchain application, and they will be divided into three parts. First of all, a little bit theory of the technology stack. What is technology about blockchain? In previous sessions, we have discussed that blockchain is not one thing, one technology. It is actually can be interpreted in different ways. So it can be a database structure, it can be application. So it's depends on very much in what context. There are many different definitions of blockchain is. So today it's good to look at a blockchain as an application. Even in application, there are different aspects to consider. So we'll go through, first of all, what is included in generally blockchain technology. Then we'll introduce a bit about economics, economic consideration, and also about implementation. I hope you can follow me now. Okay. So what is the technology stack? And the stack is I think it's a useful metaphor. This is I introduced different ways of looking at the technology. It basically says the technology can have different influence on different layers, not only technological layers, but also in general in our society. So in the middle part of this slide, I show different layers, how we can see, how we can view our society as different layers of structure. And this can be translated further into different software architecture. So you have terms like the physical layer, but even the physical layer can be viewed differently if you look from the societal point of view or from the software point of view. And so the mapping can be a bit the challenge. And you have the layers defined from the open system interface point of view. So you have the physical layer that basically describes how bits and bytes were transmitted through cables or different networks. And you from the application layer that's about interface, how we use different programs. So similarly, blockchain technology has different layers. It has different components at different layers. And it's good to keep this in mind when we later follow more lectures on the digital and the physical layer. And if you are more interested to understand, to have a better overview of the components, I suggest you can Google blockchain technology stack. The next picture shows very important components on the different layer. For example, what we commonly refer to as mining or other aspects, they are actually on the infrastructure layer. And on top of the application, we have blockchain wallets or other interfaces. So they are actually, they look quite similar to other software interfaces. So that's probably explains why sometimes people may have different views or understanding of what the technology is. It depends really on at what layer you look at, which technological components. So this much about theoretical aspects of the blockchain technology. To summarize, it has different layers and many components, which means it is not a single technology. It has to be chosen and designed in different application. So what is the economic aspects of consideration of blockchain application? I think it goes way back to the economics of information. And I have, as I show here, made 3 slides just to walk you through different aspects. First of all, when we consider economics of information, I think we need to make a distinction between information and data. And this is a well-known pyramid that is often used to show how the data value chain works. So data is quite broad concept, can be a collection of facts, numbers, or even other presentation, could be pictures. From data we derive information, and that can be further processed into knowledge and even wisdom. So there is a difference between different ways of, although they may all look the same as digital bits and bytes, but there are really substantial differences between what we generally refer to. Even when we think we are talking about the same thing, we can sometimes talk about different things. I put some key points here just to highlight that in general, data is not necessarily information, and let alone that it can be used for further knowledge or other wisdom generation. However, data is essential, is necessary to be to process or to obtain information. So we need data to create or to distill information from it. That's why data is commonly referred to as oil or sunlight, because it can be used to produce information and further valuable insights. And very important trend at the moment is that so-called datafication, is that many aspects in our daily activities, social or other aspects, are increasingly being turned into data. And that means that data is not something just there. We also have to think, depending on what we need to see and to translate, transform facts or other observations into data, which can be further used. Um, so that was a distinction between data and information. So the economics of information really has to do with, I think, the role information plays in our social economic lives. We can look at it as economists from the supply and demand of information, and how supply and demand are met or organized, coordinated through generally called institutions. Institutions are a broader term. It can sometimes be confused or used interchangeably with organizations, but it's actually very different. So I showed some examples here to show what our institutions are we considering. So market, for example, is an institution because it has clearly rules and the ways to shape our interactions. Government and the law and regulations are also institutions. Those are more formal institutions in our society. on an informal level, we also have contracts or norms, even traditions are also institutions. So the supply of information and demand of information are quite often influenced or shaped by different institutions. So institutions, they modulate the flow of information in our society, and this flow of information influences decision making at individual level. It determines our choices of goods or services, but more importantly, information flow is very important for the functioning of social ecosystems. And what ecosystem is in this context is a broader term. It refers to a collection of people and organizations with dynamic, interactive interactions, exchanging goods, services, and information. And from the economic point of view, the role of information or information exchange, we look at the way information is produced and supplied, or it is used, and who's demanding it, and what kind of benefits are generated by information exchange. So these benefits are not necessarily in monetary terms. You could also think of more other values, for example, sustainability or fairness, transparency. Those are all the benefits that can be associated with information flow or information exchange. But when we look at information flow, we should also consider the costs. Costs are not just expenditure that is made to enable information flow, but also and in the term of opportunity cost. So every resources time spent on one exchange of information cannot be spent on other ways. So that's economic terms of costs. And this is important to understand the application of blockchain, because many actors may have opportunity costs that are not necessarily immediately visible. That can explain why some blockchain application is successful and others are not. And in organizing the supply and demand of information, it is important to consider the organizational forms, but also the transaction costs it bring, what it creates, or um, it has in different economic transactions. So these are the basic considerations when we look at blockchain application and in relation to information exchange. It all goes back to what the economics of information that is well described in general economic literature, but also in more applied literature. And at the end of our slides, we'll have some suggested literature for further reading. Um, but how does this economics of information work in the blockchain application? I think we first have to look at the way or the main problems in the current organization of information flow. What we see on top is sometimes when you send the information in a long or complex supply chain, what initially shown as an eye can be eventually misformed or changed or even modified, and to the end, in the end, the receiver may have very different information. So that creates a problem, because information, if we no longer have the same information, a lot of misunderstandings can occur, and it also can have negative impact on economic transactions or the trust or other aspects we value in our society. So ideally, we would like to have a system in which information is shared, and that we have reliable and ideally identical information from the sender and the receiver. So this explains why this blockchain is widely applied in various economic processes, or in general socio-economic processes, because it ensures, or it aims to improve information exchange by improving the quality of information exchange. And I put several bullet points here. So these are the aspects that are important when we consider information exchange. Is that information is important to improve accounting. For example, when we have economic transactions or exchange, we need to have correct information to be able to keep track of the exchanges and transactions. And furthermore, we need to make sure that the people who have the right authorization to have access to information, and information has to be reliable. So we need to be able to have authentication mechanism to verify and validate information. And so these are some theoretical considerations on information exchange that are very relevant to blockchain application. But how do these considerations work in blockchain implementation? I think in implementing blockchain technology, it is important to recognize that it is necessarily a multi-actor process, because it is about information exchange and among different actors or stakeholders, and they may have a different demands and different resources and derive different values from information exchange. So that this means blockchain application is only relevant to situations in which multiple actors or organizations need to exchange information. And it is quite a puzzle to find, of course, design or identify the right information channels and agreements to exchange information. That's why blockchain implementation is typically quite a long, dynamic, very interactive process in which many aspects, many decisions and choices need to be made. I listed here several key points of consideration. To start with, it is important to identify what exactly the problem is, especially what is the problem that is related, to information exchange, information supply and demand. And furthermore, who are the stakeholders and what are their stakes and what do they want from information and what are their opportunity costs or potential benefits. And another important consideration point is basic infrastructure. So is it possible to for datafication, to have digital information, to have internet? And those are the basic considerations. And governance model has to do with who has the right or access to the information system. And then you have more technical choices like which types of blockchain should be used. That really depends on the problem and the stakeholders. I think more of these technical considerations will be introduced in other lectures on the digital and physical layer. But it's good to keep in mind that when considering blockchain application, that is important to have these points considered. The last two, but not the least two aspects are the ecosystem development and use of standards, so standardization of information exchange and flows, because they are quite important to have efficient and reliable information flow. And so these are in general the theoretical references when we consider evaluate blockchain application. So I think it is now time to see how these considerations are turned into practical research. So I think I can give the floor to Mireille to introduce about research method typically used in blockchain application.
Yes, thank you, Lam. You can put up the next slide. Yes. Yeah, so obviously Lan and I are colleagues and we work a lot on blockchain research. And we tend to look at how blockchain is applied in the real world. We consider it to be like a phenomenon. Some say it's a hype, and we also see very clear implementations of which we will present to after the break. But we research it mostly as it being an information system. And when we look at it as an information system, we do not look at only the technology, but also where technology meets organization and economics. So they really come together. And in the center, that's where information systems work together. And a part of organization is also a business process, or where people act within the organization or are involved in the process. So not just considering the technology. Can you go to the next slide, Lan? And we tend to, because we look at it as an information system when we look at theory, one familiar framework that is being used is design science by Hefner. And it's, I really like the model because it really combines the practical aspects of information technology. And it brings it back into the knowledge base, as we call it. So the basic elements of Hefner here are relevance and rigor. So when you start from a real organizational problem, and I think Lon just described the economics of it, a little bit the technology, but we will see more of that when we cover the two use cases or the examples after the break. If there's a real organizational problem, and it could have an economical aspect, let's take a look at that and see how that works in practice. So that's where the relevance comes in. But then after that, we have to bring the models that we developed. So the theory and anything that we have researched in the case study, we bring it back into the environment. So into where the system is being applied, the blockchain is being applied, and we also add it to the knowledge base. So I think that's what we try to do, at least in our research, and we like design science in that sense, and further developing the theory about blockchain. And what's the next slide, Lan? Yes. So did you want to do this one, or is it me?
I could do this one. I think one
Okay.
of the, following the general theory research methods of information systems in blockchain application, we use a lot case study methods, and we try to follow international standards when we look at use cases, so document them and using well-recognized templates. And in general, when we document or study different use cases, we try to understand at least 4 aspects of every use case. And they are, first of all, what is the problem, or what were the opportunities addressed? That was a motivational part of every use case. The second is what kind of what components are used in a blockchain technology stack. So we look at the types of blockchains and consensus mechanism and other aspects. And also very important for the use case is that what are the business benefits considered or aimed for, and also what are the governance benefits. So these are all directly related to the economics of information. So you see how each use case they make use of blockchain to create or to improve economic or socioeconomic activities. So when we studied use case on the economic aspects, we typically look at the business benefits and governance benefits, but more importantly, we paid a lot of attention to the ecosystem of different use case, because those are really the crucial part of applying blockchain technology. So we try to understand who the actors are, what their roles, and how they interact with each other. And it is at least a very important aim of this lecture also to illustrate how they study what the results are through concrete examples.
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit to that. So the use case research that we do, we don't do it only for blockchain. I also did a use case study for how 5G connectivity is being applied in agriculture and in agri-food. I think it's maybe interesting to understand how that works a little bit in practice. And feel free to add to it, Lan, also. But we tend to really cover a lot of ground by looking at a long list of use cases and then working with very specific criteria. We bring the a list of use cases down to a set of 5 or 6 use cases that we can really go into the details of this real live application of, in our case, blockchain. And in that sense, you can either compare the use cases amongst each other, or you can compare them to theory and see how theory is being applied in practice. So that depends on the exact specific methodology you want to use. But we generally learn so much and can generate so much more knowledge by looking at these use cases. I really am a big fan of the method. It brings a lot of insights.
Perhaps more additions that what this refers to how we study those use cases. Of course, every study is directed by different research questions. It also depends on the research question how we further analyze different use cases, because every use case contains quite rich sources of information. You can look at many dimensions. You can look at, besides these already mentioned parts, you can also look at their economic size, markets, products, up to every detail that is possible to study. And so that explains why there are so many different studies on different use cases. So we planned actually a short break because we thought there will be a lot of theory and quite dry stuff. And I'm looking at Nuria. Is it okay to have a break?
Or we have time for questions.
Or can reserve some time for questions.
Yeah.
I have a very quick, probably stupid question, but just to break the ice, we say
it's hard to hear you. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Oh, no, I'm saying I have a very stupid questions, maybe, but it's just to break the ice. I wonder if there is any, I don't know, recommendation or any rule that allow to establish awareness in when a problem deserves to be applied with blockchain. So when blockchain could be applied for a case. So in other words, what could be the complexity of the case to deserve a blockchain application?
Perhaps I could start by rephrasing your question. So what is the complexity when starting a blockchain application? Is that... Yes, I think I will start and then Mireille can can add. I think the complexity begins with the fact that blockchain is not a single technology. So it's not about one plug and play technology which you can decide to use or not to use. It involves many aspects. So first of all, the technology itself, and also the context. So in which there's an information problem or information exchange problem, and then it also depends on the stakes or different wishes or opportunities the stakeholders seeing. So it involves technological and economical and governance problem or considerations. It can quickly result in an explosion of dimensionalities, dimensions that adds the complexity. So that's in short my answer to your question, why it is so complex.
Yeah, and well, it depends maybe also which study. When I started studying blockchain for organic food, the use cases seemed real complex if we look at that from the ecosystem perspective. For example, how many actors in the food value chain are involved? But then when you look at it more closely, it can be that, for example, a citrus fruit plantage. Can you help me, Lan?
Plants?
Yeah, a plant. Where the growers are, if that's a corporation, and then at the same location, we have already the factory that is processing it into juice, and that the same organization is exporting it, for example, to a different continent like Europe, then the first 3 steps of the supply chain are already in hands of one big organization, and that makes the supply chain less complex. And in that sense, the whole use case less complex. And what I saw in that study, but that's, I think, different now. I think use cases are getting more and more complex as the technology is evolving. But the cases that I studied for this organic food research, they specifically chose ecosystems that were not very complex, where partners already, actors in the chain already knew each other a little bit. So, or they were already working with each other with good working relationships. So the complexity depends also on that, and also on the technology, I think.
Yeah. It's also, I think, a natural result of ecosystem, because every ecosystem is complex. It involves very dynamic, diverse interactions between different actors. And those actors are human beings, and their views, their ideas can change over time, which means you cannot design a blockchain application as if you're designing a production process, because we cannot exactly prescribe or predetermine or predict each actor's action or decisions. That brings the most complexity in blockchain application.
And then I see Lorenzo also wrote his question. When does a case deserve to be solved with blockchain? That's a really difficult question. It's really up to whoever pays for it. Also, and then so there's one thing. When does a consortium of organizations decide to start to work together on blockchain? And then the second thing is, which cases do we want to study when we research them? So for that, we use criteria, and then a case doesn't deserve it. It depends on many aspects, financial, technical. What is that? I think a larger platforms are really aiming for transparency for the consumer. If that's very, very important, and it is, I think, in these times, that could be a good criteria to start implementing blockchain.
But also to, first of all, I think it's a very good question. Apparently, it's a question that is asked by many people, and that explains why there is a very long list of checklists which can be used to see whether blockchain is applicable. So there are blockchain scans and checklists, blockchain for government, and it's I think it's highly advisable to check out some of those checklists, at least to know what the considerations are. And in our 2 use cases, we will also show the checklist we used to come to the decision whether or not to proceed with a blockchain application.
Okay, thank you.
I cannot see whether there are other questions.
Yes, there is another question from Gerard.
Yes, I thank you for the presentation thus far. Great. I was going to ask you, what are both of your views on outcome-based business models as a result of blockchain and the collection of all this valuable data?
Yeah. If I make a start, I think the business model of blockchain is clearly very different from traditional linear business models. Traditionally, you have a value chain. So each step in a value chain, people adds value, and for the next step can add more. A blockchain is typically an ecosystem business model. So it requires very different ways of thinking. In the end, we will show later, the business model is not based on the traditional cost price calculation or net present value calculation. It really has to do with understanding the information flows in the ecosystem and understanding the collectives and individual trade-offs, and to make also arrangements and also taking into account the network effect of different different ecosystems, meaning that you cannot look at one beneficiary or one user for the benefits. You have to consider benefits in a broader network. So I think in understanding or designing blockchain application ecosystem, you cannot look at it from individual organization. You really have to understand the ecosystem and understand the flows of not only information but also the values, and eventually identify the most viable ways of organizing the exchanges. It sounds probably quite abstract, but in traditional terms, you need to find, first of all, people to do the initial investment in understanding and the information exchange and flows, to develop or initial prototypes, and those typically are parties that are for the collective benefits. Governments or collectives, consortia, those are people who would do the initial investment in the infrastructure part. And then once there's an established ecosystem of information exchange, more people can make their own calculations, make their own decisions whether or not to join or to invest their own parts. It is a very dynamic process. It's quite difficult to start from the beginning to make like a blueprint of an investment proposal for a blockchain application.
Uh, yeah, but how does that relate to the outcome-based business models of the correlated and aggregated data? What I'm talking about is capturing the value of all this data from all these different actors, and then creating value of that data for modeling, statistics, and so on. That creates significant value. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I think if I understood correctly, you meant the value of the added value of using this blockchain system to analyze, to validate data, and even that adds different value to different users. For example, for researcher, you have more high quality, better quality research results.
Mm.
For a certification bodies, it can say my certificates maybe may worth more because my data, my analytics are corroborated by a blockchain-based ecosystem, and based on that, he may gain better market share. He may have the his clients may add more value to the certificates.
Mhm.
So that is actually the reason why such organizations are keen on using blockchain systems, because they can make a credible claim on the reliability of their data and their analytics.
Yeah, I get that. But what I'm driving at is that, if you look at fisheries or vineyards or so, larger vineyards or large fishing companies can go to the smaller, fishermen and groups of fishermen, and by using blockchain and automizing the entire, you know, production, or from catch to plate, or from harvesting the grapes to your table, that correlated and aggregated data can be sold or can be used to benefit the entire value chain of all the different players, but also can be sold as best practices. That's what I'm driving at. This is what I was saying, that outcome-based business models is the result of the sum of the data.
It's true. It's a result of connecting different data sources, and so that you may have a better record keeping for the whole ecosystem.
Mm.
It's true.
Yeah, great.
And I this, at least from our perspective as researcher for the sustainability of agri-food system, that is our personal, at least my personal drive to look at the possibilities of blockchain, because I see its potential improving the general quality of information of our society.
Okay.
Thanks for the remark. I think it's very insightful to understand eventually what this could lead to with a different way of information exchange systems.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've worked in a number of projects before, and you know, IoT connectivity and blockchain in a lot of these big vineyards basically would sell the data for best practices. So, I mean, if you want to make wines as good as our Bordeaux wines, buy our data. You want to have the best and more sustainable fishing practices, buy our data. You see what I mean? So they use that collective as an example for best practices, but they sell that. So the whole idea is, how do you monetize that? And that was really my question as to what was your view on this monetization of the aggregated sum of all this valuable data. You mentioned earlier that data is like gold, right? It's another incremental value on the value chain. And it's extremely important that on the forum, we understand that, you know, the benefits of blockchain are fantastic, right? And but also the sum of all these wonderful bits of information for analytics and so on makes it a aggregated value, right? And it goes, the same thing goes for circular economies, for a lot of other industry sectors, not just agriculture or food.
I think in addition to that, the monetization of aggregated information in terms of making it possible to have benchmarking and better information services, best practices, they are not specifically to blockchain. Any information system that enables information flow or aggregation would be able to achieve that, but blockchain adds more to it, as later lecture would show. It adds also a layer of safety and immutability. So it's not only making it possible to monetize data, but also adds other components such as we will show later the themes, giving more control to the data owners and giving more access to parties that are currently less favored in the information system. But I think we can get to that shortly after the break, after this. Shall I continue if we don't need the break?
I think a 5-minute break would be good, though. Grab a coffee.
Okay.
Yes.
For me, it would be good.
So 5 minutes break.
Yeah, maybe we can fix Lan's audio problem.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
That would be great.
So
okay,
5 minutes and then
5 minutes break. Yeah, we'll be back at 5 to 2.
This. Was that Gero?
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just proposing that. I'm not that I have the solution. Sorry.
Be right back.
I'll see.
Gives you some time to experiment with settings, Lan.
I couldn't find any settings actually. So it is in more optimized.
And Lan, if you go to the upper left-hand corner where it says Zoom, scroll down to preferences, and then you will see the output volume of your mic. Turn that all the way up.
I think I need to first leave this full screen mode.
Lan, can you hear me?
No? Yes, I can.
Okay, so a better thing to do is that you have this button that shows mute the microphone. You have a pull-up menu there.
Yes.
And then you should see audio settings in the bottom.
Yes,
yeah.
I see audio settings.
Okay, so now you see the volume of the input level of your microphone. You can adjust that.
I have adjusted to maximum.
Is it getting better? It's getting better, yes.
Okay, so that is done.
Okay, good.
Otherwise, Lan, you can cry.
I'm not a big fan of crying.
Okay, I'm going to grab a coffee.
Okay, thank you. So I hope this works better now.
Much better.
Sounds much better. Thank you, Lan.
Are there other buttons to press?
No idea.
No, don't press any of those. No.
No need to press more buttons.
I keep this. I'll grab a cup of coffee too. See you in a minute.
Is your sound any better, Lan?
I hope so. I have put it to maximum.
Sounds good.
Maybe my headset is finally. Would you like to start with the quiz, Mireille?
Sure.
Okay. No. And I'll let you start.
I still see the break slide. Now we can wait maybe 1 minute or two. Yeah.
If you would give me a sign, I will start it.
I'll give you a very special sign. I was doing this webinar once for a Nordic agro testbed network, and they asked everybody to turn their camera on. And it was a really nice session. So if you want to turn on your camera today, it's very more rewarding and fulfilling as a presenter to see who you're talking to. So please feel free to share your camera.
It would feel more like real lecture.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Begoña. Muito obrigada, muchas gracias.
The only reason why I'm not turning on is because I'm always sit down and my laptop is on a shelf.
Oh, okay.
So you wouldn't see me if I don't stand up.
Oh, okay.
But at this case, I'm up, so I can turn on.
Nice to see you, even if it's just for a little bit. Okay, Lan, can you put up the quiz slide?
Yes.
So instead of doing a Mentimeter or anything, we just have a slide with some questions. To recap, it's just for fun, really. It's nothing fancy. If you don't know it, Google it. So can we start with the first question? How many layers are there in the blockchain technology stack? Just think about it for a second yourself, and I'll give you just the right answer in a few minutes. So do you remember what Lan said about how many layers there were? And we'll give you the answer. It's 7. There were 7 layers. So, and anything in between the top layer and the bottom layer, yeah, try to remember it. Maybe next time we'll do the full layer quiz and see if you remember all the layers. But do you
remember 7? It's the name that matters.
I know. That's why we have the next question. Do we at least remember which layer was at the bottom and which layer was at the top? We don't care how many layers there are. So think about it for a second. Which layer was at the bottom and which one was at the top? There we go, Lan. Provide us with the right answer, please. The physical layer was at the bottom. So that's where we'll connect all the hardware.
Or the infrastructure layer.
Infrastructure layer. And the application layer is our favorite layer, Lan, is always at the top. Which verticals most commonly apply blockchain technology? It's basically a guess because we haven't really told you. But what's your guess? So by vertical, we would say an industry, or which sectors do you think mostly apply blockchain technology? Maybe we can do an open mic for 2 seconds. So anyone who wants to write or say which sectors they think mostly apply blockchain? Nobody? Okay. Sorry?
The law?
I can't hear you.
The lawyers, so the documents on the lawyer sector.
Still can't hear.
No? Are you listening to me?
I can see you, Hugo.
But are you listening to me or not?
Yes, but I couldn't hear you very clearly.
Yeah, my answer was related with the law, basically, in finance.
Law.
Yeah.
Okay, law, and I see the financial sector. Martha provided that through the chat. Law, I'm not sure, but financial, I'm sure it's here. Lam, can you show us? Yeah, so we have financial, logistics, supply chain. It's not the only, it's the two most common that we probably think about. So Lan, anything about the law? Do you think it's
yes, I think I'll come to it later. And what we call it identity management and contracting laws and cryptocurrencies, of course, about regulations. I think they're quite active on that.
The cryptocurrency would be finance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last question. It's just for those who know, it's not really, well, maybe it is important. Who's the founder of blockchain technology? Anybody who knows? Let's see the answer, Lan. I think the why is not supposed to be there. It's Satoshi Nakamoto, and his identity is actually unknown. It's an interesting read if you Google a little bit about this, if you haven't done so. This person is either hasn't existed or has fled or is enjoying many Bitcoin somewhere in the world, but nobody's sure about who he is. So, okay, I can hear some background noise, I think. So make sure to mute your phone if you're not speaking. Gero, maybe? Gero?
I think Gero disagrees with Satoshi Nakamoto.
Gero, please mute your mic.
So, I think everybody's muted now. So if you agree, I would continue with the lecture. Yes. I think now the main part about blockchain application landscape, after introducing the theoretical references and our research methods, I think it's good to look at the landscape with different lenses and different views. But first of all, the title we used, blockchain vertical, it's a buzzword that is used a lot in business literature. But I think it's good to refer to it. It is also sometimes referred to as business vertical or vertical market. Obviously, different from a horizontal market, but I think it's a term just used to describe a specific industry or sometimes a combination collection of the industry or market that focuses on a particular niche. For example, particularly on blockchain or on certification or on foods. And it emphasizes sometimes the vertical integration aspect of the industry. And a vertical sometimes combines industries or sectors as referred to in other contexts. And many times you also know that you may also run into people who talk about verticals, but naming examples that are just industries or sectors. And there are some example verticals, for example, banking and financial services are very often referred to as a vertical, but you could also imagine that insurance could be in its own vertical. Energy is considered as a vertical very often, and sometimes agriculture is also considered as a vertical. It really depends on what your perspective and what your focus is, and then there are many different ways to look at different verticals. So in our research, we try to classify different use cases and application of blockchain into different verticals, but really depends on the context. We label them differently. And in the coming slides, I will walk with you through some typical verticals. But first, it's I think to describe verticals, good to look at what the focus points are. And these are several themes that are used in different verticals. The first one is identity management. And so identity is about correctly identifying person, people, or organization, and also objects. And this can be applied in different contexts. For example, in a way, we at the moment, our identity is managed, of course, by governments. They register our passports, driver's licenses. But of course, you could imagine we could register our identity through a blockchain system. And that's currently a very active area called self-sovereign identity. In some countries, there's even examples of issuing identity through no longer traditional paper-based passports or certificates or other ID cards. And this can be further applied for many authentication purposes to prove the authenticity of products and services and some claims. Another theme that is often used in different verticals is transparency. And transparency is again often interpreted in different ways. Sometimes it refers to traceability, sometimes it refers to accountability or auditability of information flows and exchanges. The third theme is efficiency of using blockchain. Actually, this is highly debated. You could consider blockchain as sometimes less efficient than traditional centralized database systems, because it involves a lot of redundancy in the records. So there's be aware of different opinions on the efficiency claim. But the main drivers for using blockchain for efficiency purposes are, first of all, in disintermediation, in a sense that when you share information in the peer-to-peer way, you don't need intermediary, which improves efficiency. So in a way that the workflow becomes more efficient, so you don't have a lot of intermediary points or organizations. But this is also highly debatable, because even with blockchain, you still need intermediary parties who would provide information or other validation services, but it's named differently. So it's good to keep in mind that these are the claimed benefits or contributions of blockchain, and that also blockchain can improve automation through so-called smart contracts. And that means some of the agreements can be coded into computer recognizable programs that facilitate transactions. So these are again some theoretical considerations that are further applied, translated into different applications and different verticals. Um, as an example, we show here how these themes are being translated in a broader vertical that we can perhaps label it as agri-food. So you see, if we look at this landscape of blockchain application in agri-foods, we see certainly many verticals, but generally, if we look at the themes, we can look at the theme, first of all, is a lot about improving the well-being and income or other working conditions of farmers. We label it farm-centric. So you have applications such as agri-digital or agri-wallet that aim to provide better services for farmers' transactions or their market access. And the second main line of blockchain application is on supply chain. So this is really about improving transparency, traceability, and other qualities of a supply chain management, including efficiency and including less environmental impact, so sustainability aspect of supply chain management. And the third broader a theme or a vertical is about informing consumers. And so this has to do with the fact that our supply chain or food chain are getting increasingly more complex, not transparent, and we as consumers do not often know where our food products come from and whether what it means to be organic or fair or other quality attributes. So many blockchain applications aim to inform consumers better of the origin and production methods and also other quality aspects of products. For example, in the case of wine, what is really from Porto, in the case of olive and oil and other well-known examples, but it's also about the fairness of the supply chain, whether the farmers are paid a fair price. And so there you see applications such as fair food or right origins. Those are aimed for providing better information to the consumers about various aspects of food products. And the other two themes, you could look at it horizontally. So the three actual verticals, they emphasize different application area. The two horizontal ones actually they encompasses different verticals. So it's really about looking at first of all the perspective from people, improving well-being of people in different supply chains or different areas or different ecosystems. And the other one is to look at it from the perspective of the planet. So there really is about using blockchain to improve the sustainability of climate of our planets, for example, in the context of climate change and environmental degradation. And so this is one way of looking at the blockchain application landscape as a combination of different verticals and different themes. And we can look at landscape also at its geographic dispersion. We see blockchain currently being applied almost in every part of the world. And here we show actually the location of the headquarters of key players. But of course, their influence can be globally. And we colored the different applications according to the themes that they try to address. So this is based on one of our research, which is based on an inventory of about 38 use cases, which we label, classify different aspects, and which made it possible to visualize it this way. And the paper on this and the data sheet, the underlying Excel sheet, you can find it online. And the last slide also shows the link to the article. So this is a blockchain application in general in agri-food or the broader vertical. But how does this work in a specific use case? So I think I'm going to dive deeper into one use case that we from our institute coordinated and also currently still working on it to bring it a step further. It's called Flori-chain. Flori-chain, as name suggests, it's in a floriculture supply chain about ornamental plants and flowers. And so in this chain, in this supply chain, broadly a vertical supply chain, and with products as cut flowers and potted plants, one of the major problems is that currently consumer want to know whether poisonous pesticides were applied and whether some forbidden chemicals were used to produce the plants, although not directly a risk to public health, but it's considered as very dangerous for biodiversity, especially the health of bees. So that is just to show you the context why it is important to have a blockchain application in this floriculture chain. And before we start, we look at problems. The problem is that many parties want to know how much pesticide or other agrochemical products were applied in the supply chain. But currently, the information is not shared from one company to the next step of the supply chain, and consumers or buyers have to rely on certification parties to certify whether a product is sustainable or not, whether it complies to existing regulations or not. So it's a typical situation in which many parties are involved in managing or sharing the information on agrochemical use, but nobody has complete view of how in the whole lifetime of potted plants, how many doses of different chemicals were applied. And so to show you how we chose this use case, we use one checklist to verify the applicability of blockchain. So these on the left column are the typical aspects that are required to apply a blockchain. So you really have to you need a situation in which multiple parties are sharing information with each other, and that's it's not a one-time thing. They need to regularly update the information. So you want to know whether in the phase of seedlings or later in the plants, whether new chemicals were applied or not. So you need a monitoring system, and the data also requires verification, because obviously if you don't ask grower, he's not going to tell you all the detailed information. And or if sometimes people or producers tend to tell information that's more to their advantage, especially when they know as consumer or as buyer you cannot verify it, they would probably not tell exactly information as the factual information. And the other aspects are data needs to be persistent over time, so you cannot be corrected or modified later on when situation has become different. And especially important in blockchain application use cases is that data need to be tamper resistant, meaning that no party or not individuals or organizations cannot easily modify or change the data to their advantage. And and also the other advantage is that in the current situation there are a lot of intermediaries that adds the complexity and also a lot of costs for different parties in the system. And for Flori-chain, all these aspects were checked, so that we together with different parties in the ecosystem, we agreed that the blockchain is very applicable and also desirable to be applied. But how does it work in practice? So in this Flori-chain, you have in a whole lifetime cycle of potted plants. It starts from a piece of rooted seedlings. It should be cut. It should be multiplied into different young plants, and younger plants were sent put further in pots, and they were sent to different gardening center and to sold to consumers. So it involves various producers who take care of different phases of potted plants. In this application, we chose not to involve every party in the supply chain, but representative parties in the supply chain. The first one is a propagator. A propagator is a company that either produce younger seedlings or make young plants from branches. So you put them into soil and make sure that they grow roots, and that can be further planted to produce more younger plants. So that's a propagator. So we have a company that's called Plantize that takes care of the propagation part, so producing from really the seedlings, younger branches to potable plants. And you have the grower that really grows younger plants into plants that we typically see in a gardening center or in shops. the idea is that when a grower buys younger plants, he doesn't know what in the previous phase was applied to the plants. It can be fertilizer, it can be other agrochemicals. Currently, the information is not shared. You can imagine, and it's not to each party's advantage. You tell the other party that I applied something that can be that is possibly forbidden, or that is possibly causing a problem with NGOs or other parties that are against the use of pesticides. And because the information is not shared as a sector together, they have have an image of using in the Dutch media poison because they consider the use of pesticides have caused the death of bees and other insects. So that's a general context. While if they really tell each other, share with each other the use of chemicals, perhaps the next phase step in a supply chain can use less if a plant has already previously been treated or been some chemicals or other material already were applied. So in that way, together, if they share the information, uh, collectively, they may actually use less agrochemicals. That was the idea. So the economics of this situation is that it's actually a collective action problem. If everybody knows what in the previous step or in the next phase, what chemicals were applied, they can optimize their own decision. So they can choose to use less chemicals, less other poisonous or chemicals that have negative impact. And but currently it's not the situation, but also because a lot of the registration and information is recorded on paper, so it's not easy to share with the next step, next chain link in the supply chain. So the idea in this Flori-chain is that if we're together, the propagator and the grower, they would sort of keeping the same record book of what had been applied to the potted plants. The buyer or the auction can then have more confidence in their claims that our products in the whole lifetime had used less chemicals. It has less environmental impact, therefore more sustainable, and well, they can have better market propositions for the customers. And however, if there's no party checking whether the applied the chemicals or other plant production materials were used correctly, still for the consumer there's less of a guarantee whether the information is reliable. That's why in this use case we also involved two organizations that are responsible for the data validation. One is Flori Code, so that's the party that ensures the names and other the type, the variety of the plants are coded in a standardized way, and also whether a company is producing what the names and the types of plants were recorded in a standard way, which enables further analysis. For example, to link it with official requirements on the prescription of the use of chemicals. And the organization that manages whether a chemical or pesticide is allowed or not is the Dutch Plant Authorization Plant Production Authority. It's, I think, on the European level, it's EFSA that take care of which chemical is safe or not to use. But every country has its own authority to make sure whether a product is allowed or not. So in the Netherlands, it's called the CTGB. It's the Dutch authority that verifies or approves the use of chemicals in supply chain in the Netherlands. And this information exchange through the grower and the propagator with this data validator or validating organizations are currently not actually are not taking place in an automatic way, because to build the interface between different databases requires investment. There's also not a strong incentive for individual organizations to do that. So for this pilot, we built this interface so that when a grower enters information on chemicals or pesticides applied, a message is automatically sent to the database of the CTGB. So it verifies whether the chemical and the dosage, especially the dosage, conform the requirements of the authority. So in this way, he knows for sure that the chemical that he applied is allowed, and so he won't have problem later on in or in the market or with his buyer. So this is general information flow. So through blockchain system, different parties like the propagator, the grower, and the auction. So in this way, also in the role of a buyer, altogether they now have actual and really real-time and reliable information on the use of chemicals on the party on the level of every batch of the plants. So this way, it improves through the system the transparency and traceability of the use of chemicals. In the specific case, plant production materials is improved, and this also improves the sustainability of this supply chain. And so we were talking about, for every blockchain use case, it's always in an ecosystem. So how does the ecosystem of this Flori-chain look like? What you see is that at the core, the blue part, the technological part, you have different parties that are work together. They use the information system, the grower and the propagator. But we also have a software developer that helps, obviously, to develop the platform. And these are the parties that are most visible to other parties, because they use the system and they enter information, they make use of the information. But in a little bit more greener background, you also have other parties, for example, the CTGB and certification organizations. They indirectly use the information, or they make it possible. So they are also part of the ecosystem, which are not very prominent if you just look at the blockchain itself, but they are quite actually quite essential for the success of this use case. And later in the summer school, I think we will also provide an illustration how the information is different information on the use of chemicals is entered and is validated and also shared through the supply chain. But I think for the time being, it's good to have to see how those abstract concepts such as transparency and traceability and also ecosystem work in practice. So I hope this gives you a more tangible more concrete view of how a blockchain application in practice could look like, and perhaps you could see some possibilities also for your own ecosystem or your own problem or supply chain. But that's every supply chain has its specific problems and possibilities. I think it has to be looked at individually in different contexts. Still, I think if we look at this specific Flori-chain application, how this means for you as a research institute using nanotechnology, I think, well, of course, right now in this use case, it doesn't involve nanotechnology at all, but we can still consider some possibilities. For example, at the moment, information on the use of agrochemicals is entered through an information system, but still you can ask question whether the entered information really corresponds to the actual chemical that was spread on the plants. Can we use so this is a so-called last mile problem. Still there is a correspondence between what is entered into the information system and what is happening in reality in different production or other economic processes. And can we apply, for example, nanotechnology to ensure that the chemicals are applied better and also the information better corresponds to the chemicals? Can we make sort of a profile of the molecular or components of the chemicals and make an information profile of that and use that, share that information as well with the blockchain system? That's something we are considering. For example, if we use a smart spraying machine, perhaps it can automatically detect what chemical, what pesticides were sprayed in that way and sends information to the blockchain system. That sounds perhaps now still like science fiction, but in theory it is quite feasible. And I know in other verticals and other industries, they are looking at these possibilities. And currently we are also working on the possibility of using blockchain to trace the empty pesticide containers. But there's also the problem whether we can correctly identify each container and whether the container has been refilled with other chemical instead of originally labeled chemicals. So there we see perhaps possibilities of using nanotechnology to ensure the authenticity of the information and also the content of different pesticide or products, materials that were applied to food or other products. I think I leave it here with this Flori-chain case, and Mireille will, I think, introduce the other use case that is in a very different context.
Yeah, Lang, just one question, because actually this last point, I think that this is very interesting for us, for INLers. So do you think that this Flori-chain solution is suitable, for example, for incorporating sensors for, I don't know, hydric stress or water consumption or amount of pesticides or chemicals? So in order to have in an automatic way to gather or to harvest this data from the cultivars?
Yes, I certainly think it's possible, theoretically, definitely. And we actually, at our institute, we're looking at this application in the form of we are actually applying for a patent, in which we try to to elaborate on this possibility of linking smart spraying machines, which recognizes the content, which has a built-in sensor that can register and share information on what has on the chemicals or other materials that were applied to plants, and register this information through blockchain. So theoretically it's possible. Technologically we think it's also feasible. We only haven't seen practical use cases yet, but it's very often mentioned as a possibility and very promising future application.
Yeah, no, because in countries like Spain, Portugal, or Italy, in the south, for example, the control of water consumption is a key point for many cultivars. So that determines the economic success of a cultivar, for example. So it's important to know what is the impact in terms of water consumption of a crop. Yeah. For example, no? It's
yes.
Just...
Well, we actually use this currently, this example to meant to inspire growers and other parties in the chain to show how information could be shared in this way and to ensure the sustainability of the whole supply chain, actually. So everybody can.
Okay, thank you. Mireia, sorry for interrupting.
I think there is a question also from Marian. Just to say that the meeting was scheduled to finish at 3:30 Portuguese time, but if everyone can stay a little bit longer, it's good.
Sorry that I.
No, now it's interesting. So it's
I have to go. No, I'm joking. I can stay.
So Marian.
Well, actually, there were two questions, but I will just do one. I'm kind of curious because now there's all this talk about quantum computation and the cryptography or the security of the data, how it can be compromised or not by the changing from classical to quantum. Blockchain, in a way, looks like it could use more computational power, but on the other hand, it would need stronger algorithms for this type of cryptography. Can you comment on this? Is this something that is being researched, or it's something that is well known and it's already taken care of?
I could comment one of the major threats to the success of blockchain is quantum computing, because right now one of the security aspects of blockchain is that there's no, with current computing power, it's almost close to impossible to hack or to compromise the database. But the idea is that with quantum computing, it may become possible to actually modify the database, but that is right now a remote likelihood that is being considered. But I think our colleagues at IBM may tell more about this.
Yeah, that's right, Lan. So what I can say very briefly, we're working on it. So we actually have a group.
Self-destructive.
Yes. So it's always it's extremely hard to make something quantum safe in hindsight, but we have not only a blockchain group here in Zurich, but also a quantum safe cryptography group. And so people are working on future generation of the blockchain that we are building that will be quantum safe.
Okay, nice to hear. Thank you. The other was just a comment. It's on the last mile comment that Lan mentioned. I mean, it's not only for the food industry, right? It's they're talking about the use of droids from trucks to final destinations on that last mile. And yeah, I think nanotechnology could definitely be present there, at least in terms of sensors and this tracking. But yeah, that's another topic. But thank you.
But I think Carol, our colleagues at IBM will touch upon that as well. I think they'll go deeper into that, with especially with crypto anchoring, with really using nanotechnology and other cryptographic methods to really link physical objects to the information that is in the information system. Right, Carol?
Yes, good summary. Thank you, Lan. Indeed, but that will be more my nanotech colleagues. And I think that's on the schedule for the next day of this event here, right, Nuria?
Okay, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm really going to give the floor to Maya. Sorry.
Yeah, so let me introduce you to Nori.com, which is a US-based solution. First, let me introduce you to this blockchain solution. So it's a new way for anyone in the world to pay to remove excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They say they're really the only solution in the world that actually created a market to trade carbon sequestration. So not trading just carbon credits, but really bringing carbon back into the soil. And they've been operating since 2017. On the screen, you see a screenshot of their website where anybody can pay farmers through the platform that have already sequestrated carbon into the soil. There is a whole measuring system around it. So we do need a third party to be able to tell if the carbon is really being put back into the soil. But it's all being based on actual data coming from the farms. So it's a completely different use case as the Flori-chain use case. It's like cross-vertical. It's a completely different theme. It's about environmental and footprint measurements, and it's supposed to create transparency. But also, yeah, really innovative in being the only solution that does this. It started as a solution that was created during a hackathon, actually, in 2017. Lon, can you go to the next slide? So this use case was, we didn't really use this checklist. I did it for the presentation to go through the same checklist that Lon presented. I won't go into it in much detail, but you can apply it to multiple use cases. But it actually came from our research that we did for the FAO to basically do an inventory of how environmental blockchain is being used currently. It does involve multiple parties sharing data. So that's the way I use the checklist for this presentation. If you look at the economics, yeah, they really did establish this market for carbon removal. It's not used throughout the world as of yet. There are only farmers involved in the US. They may look into Canada, but other than that, it's not yet being used in Europe, for example. What they do with their blockchain platform is they allow for tokens, and that way, so what they use, the name of the token is a Nori, and one Nori represents how many tons of carbon was removed from the soil, and then the market itself will create an actual price for it. So that's the idea of using the token, and a uniform price, creating also an incentive to remove carbon. So in that way, it's really an idealistic solution, hopefully getting more and more people, but also large scale buyers to buy this carbon. And then, yeah, the idea is that they will really set the market and create the market. Another final thing on that previous slide was that what it does in current carbon trading, there may be double spending, and avoiding double counting is one of the main features that is why we know blockchain, what blockchain is known for, which is now being avoided with Nori.com. Now you can go to the next slide. So if we look at the ecosystem, Nori is involved with soil metrics, and soil metrics uses a USDA approved method to run scenarios to determine if there's really a reasonable level of confidence of how much carbon a farmer has actually stored in their soil. So this method comes from University Colorado and Colorado State, sorry. So that's their method, their solid method that they use. Sorry, that was Comet Farm, and Soil Metrics is the partner that actually uses the method. So they are the three that work together. Nori is the partner that creates the platform. They have their own developers. They don't. They work with other IT organizations, but they're in the yellow circle actually. So Granular, Tritera, and Docus are all involved and links to the platform. So what a farmer can do if he already uses a system to map his fields, for example, or another farm management system, it can have like a plugin into Nori, and then he can get paid for the carbon that he has already put back into the soil. So it's more accessible than going through just the website of Nori. So this is there's kind of the circle around it. And then around that, we see government organizations who are involved, like the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, also other universities, and the Nature Conservancy. And so that's the whole ecosystem, and it's expanding. And for example, Locus and Tritera are partners that only joined in 2020 or 2021. Yes, so that's the ecosystem. And then if you look at Nano, I'm really curious about your ideas, because I'm not that familiar with how to measure carbon. But if we look at what Nori does, a project is created in this case where a supplier provides data on carbon removal. This data is now coming from the farmer, or from the systems that he uses. But what about soil sampling, or what about any other ideas? And I'm not sure if this is your field of expertise, but yeah, I thought it would be interesting because it's such a different use case to at least consider it. But there may be no link to nano. What do you think?
Suggestions?
Any suggestions? I know there are soil scanners, but they are not what we're looking for here. We're probably really looking at how to measure the actual composition of the soil. You could make a link with agroecology topics, looking at any ecosystems living in the soil. Living soil is a term that we use there in agroecology. But I think it's far away from our wine use case, probably. My fears are confirmed by your silence.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah, we have some sensors and some ideas that I've heard about soil, but I don't know how mature they are to talk about them. Right
Okay,
now.
well, and everything starts with a good idea or a bad idea. Of 100 ideas, you need only maybe 5 or 10 that are good. So, but that's good to know. That's something that we can explore later on. It's just yes.
Just a quick comment on that, Mireille. On the project that I work for, vineyards, it was really important, especially for the vineyards in the Champagne district. They really want to have an ideal composition of the soil, but they actually sense for specific, types of ingredients or chemicals on the soil, like calc, or different types of, in the Champagne district, you have a little bit of carbon or ashes and different types of chemical compositions. And that's very important for them, for the flavor and so on, for the terroir of the wines. So I think that could be a really good area for us to explore. I'm sure Lorenzo and the rest of the team will end up with some ideas as they get their creative juices flowing.
Sounds great. Shall I
Yeah,
move on?
sure. Yeah. Sure. We have to think internally about all these possibilities, but for sure that I am thinking in many ideas that we can discuss how to implement this with our expertise. Yeah, sure.
Great. I think we are a bit over time, so I thought we prepared a summary sheet just to wrap it up. So I think we thought about it beforehand. What will be our takeaway messages? I think we summarized a bit. First of all, that blockchain application is more than the technology itself. It's really about organizing information exchange in a better way, depending on how you define better. And then the economics of information is very important. I think we, in any application of blockchain, we need to critically look at the role of information and what it means for economic and socioeconomic exchanges, and the benefits and costs, and also how to organize it. And then the implementation of blockchain is necessarily a multi-actor process. So we really need to think at ecosystem level rather than from individual organization or institute. So it requires good understanding of the ecosystem in which you are operating, but also knowing that ecosystem is not a static concept. It can evolve, expand, and develop over time. And then currently, we do see a lot of possibilities for connecting nanotechnologies to blockchain application. We haven't seen any proven cases yet, but this is not necessarily discouraging, but I believe it creates a lot of future possibilities. So those were what we thought to be a take-home message. My video has stopped working, so I hope you don't mind. but I'm looking forward to your comments and suggestions on these take-home messages. We hope to bring this further in the next sessions and summer workshops, summer schools, and when we work on our own joint use cases, we could perhaps develop these ideas further.
That'll be fun.
And last but not least, we thought, of course, we went through things rather quickly and on a very abstract level still. In these articles, we provide more background information, but more importantly, the literature that we studied, perhaps it could be worthwhile to look at. They have more detailed technical or other information in it that may help also for further development of our own use cases.
Thank you for wrapping up, Lan.
You're great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent presentations, both of you. I really appreciate it. Lan and Mireille, it was really great for me. I'm sure my colleagues really enjoyed them too.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think that we have at INL work at home to do with all this information. I think that we have to think in this challenge that Mireille and Lan sent us, no? And yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. We enjoyed this greatly, and we look forward to next sessions. At least on behalf of Mireille.
Of course.
Well, thank you very much, Lan and Mireille, and we see each other if you would like to join us next week on Monday for the physical layer with IBM, and
Of course, I
Wednesday
wouldn't
for
miss
the
it.
digital layer.
Yeah, I'm dying to listen to it.
Thank you
Well,
very
thank
much.
you very much, everyone.
Thank
you.
you. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you. Ciao. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.